Hey everyone, Night Haro here, and today we're going to talk about Templar tanking. So for those of you who might have been out of the loop, haven't been paying attention the past few patches, Templars have finally gone from being just not very good, technically viable, but not something you really want to use or something really hard to use. They've gone from that to finally, now they went from like fully viable to like actually good. Okay, they're actually in a really good spot right now, and it's taken a lot of time, but they're in a great spot. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, as almost always, there's going to be timestamps below. I am going to go over some housekeeping stuff, explain the structure for this video. So if you don't care, don't want to listen to me, just want to get to like what skills should I put on my bar or whatever. First off, there's a link in the community channel to the cheat sheet for this build. You could just copy that, or you can skip around. You're probably already gone by now, so. All right, so for those who do want to know a little bit more in depth, so first off, the way I structure my videos is I typically, for tanks, like gear, Mundus stone, CP, ability points, all that kind of stuff is pretty much the same on all tanks with a few variations, okay? So I have actually done those in their own videos. And so if you want to learn about where to put your ability points, what gear to wear and stuff like that, I'll link a few videos, and I have some more coming up now for the new patch for update 35 with regards to gear and what you should wear in different situations. But I've already also got a few on the channel, so you can go look at those. I will cover it briefly in this video, like what CP you should use, what gear you would typically wear, but I'm not going to go in depth because I've done that in other videos. This video is mainly to go over Templar tanking skills. And also, I won't go over every skill you'd ever need on a tank, but I will go over all the class skills that you might want to use. And then in other videos, I've gone with all those kind of auxiliary, kind of niche skills that you'll use a few times in a couple different trials, or you might want for certain situations. But I've done their own video on those. So again, try to keep the scope a little bit narrow on this video. But I'm doing all 6 classes, how to tank on them, and all the skills and stuff you'd want to use. So that'll be on the channel if you're interested. So with that, let's go ahead and look at those skills, okay? So first, I'm going to start off here, and I'm going to flash up the cheat sheet just so you can have a chance to see this. So this is meant to be a reference guide. It's not meant to be a guide in and of itself. It's just for quick reference. Again, you can find this on the community tab on YouTube, always here. You can also come by the That Wasn't the Boss Discord if you'd like, which is the Discord I run, and see it there. I also have similar cheat sheets for all the tank classes that I'm going to be releasing, and then I also have some for stuff like group optimization and just other useful things. So check out the community tab, and you should be able to see them there. I kind of update them as time goes on. Now, looking at our front bar and back bar setup, basically you have two kinds of skill slots here. And what you have is you have skills that kind of never leave your bar, and I'll highlight those now. And then you have skills that are kind of flex spots, okay? And this is true for almost all tanking classes. You have skills, you can always move just about any skill on your bar, but again, in 99% of situations, you're going to have some that are always going to be there, and then you're going to have some that kind of swap out very often, okay? And those are your flex spots. Now, when you're going to decide where you want to put skills on your bar, a couple of things to note. Which bar, front bar, back bar, does matter, okay? So it might matter because it's a sword and board skill, so you have to have a sword and board equipped to use it. It might also matter because maybe it's a damage mitigation ability. And typically our front bar is where we spend most of our time, and that's where we want the most damage mitigation. That's kind of our damage mitigation bar. And so we'll put stuff on that bar to help with mitigation, and then things on our back bar, we'll put things with a long duration. So we switch to our back bar, we hit the buff. Once we got all of our buffs up on that back bar, we go ahead and move back to our front bar, and that's where we spend most of our time. Now, within a given bar, it doesn't really matter where a skill is at. It doesn't matter at all. It's only helpful for you. So what I tend to recommend is that everybody come up with some sort of mental construct or some kind of idea or useful framework of where you put skills on your bar, and this will really help you later on if you want to try other classes, because then you only have to remember that certain skills have changed. So I'll give you an example and kind of explain what I do. So for me, my 3 spot on all my tanks is taunt, and that's front bar and back bar. Front bar, it's always my melee taunt. Back bar, it's always my range taunt. Don't really change that. You never want to put 2 taunts on one bar. Like I've seen people with 2 taunts on one bar, a range and a melee. You never want to do that. You just don't need to. And you want to be able to taunt something quickly on either bar. So I always put it in 3 because it's easy to reach. That's where I put my spammable on my DPSs. So it's ability that you use a lot. So that's why it's there. Now, number 2, I always put as my self-heal on all my tanks. My main self-heal is always number 2 on all my tanks. So I know if I'm in a panicky situation, I don't know what to do, number 2, that's what heals me. I hit that button. And then number 4. So number 4 on all of my bars, if half the classes have a shield, a class shield that you want to use very often, and then half the classes don't. So on the classes that do, 4 is where I put my self shield. And then on classes that don't, I usually put something else that I still use quite often, and it's typically another damage mitigation ability or another heal or something like that. So that's what I do with number 4. And then 1 and 5 on my front bar or flex spots. On the back bar, I tend to, again, I already said I have 3. 1 tends to almost always be my wall of elements, with like one exception on a Nightblade, but it tends to be my wall of elements, and it doesn't leave my bar. Your wall of elements is how you apply your weapon enchant for your 2-handed weapon to reduce enemies' resistances, which is what you should have. A crusher enchant is what it's called. That's what you always put here on, or that's what I always put here on my number 1 spot for me. And then, and then it just kind of depends. Number 4 is almost always my source of major resolve. So whenever I flip to my back bar, you always want to have major resolve up. So it's almost always in the 4 position. And then 2 tends to be maybe some kind of class ability, typically a heal or something, but it's just kind of a flex spot, but tends to be a class ability. And then 5 is what I use for kind of everything else. So all the non-class abilities you might want to have, overflowing altar, etc. So that's how I set up my bar typically. And coming up with something like that will really help you just get used to tanking and learn where your abilities are, so you don't have to look at your bar, and you can spend more time looking at what the bosses and the enemies are doing and less time staring at your bar. And I just want to go ahead and give that advice out. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about our abilities. So we're going to start by talking about the abilities that don't really move on our bar. And here you can see I have a drop-down format, and I have a few that I would say don't move, but I actually have a drop-down. So basically, the reason I have a drop-down underneath those abilities is kind of like you're going to use one or the other ability. They both do the same thing. They just do it in different ways, but you're always going to have it on your bar. So on my front bar here, I have Honor the Dead as our major self-heal, and then I also have Vigor as another option. Both are valid. One uses mag, one uses stam. They work a little bit different. So from some friends, actually Carcios, if you know him, he personally likes to have a heal over time, and he mains a Templar tank. He loves his Templar tank, knows a lot about him. I checked with him when I made this build and was like, hey, what do you think about this? So he really likes having heals over time, so he goes with Vigor in this situation. I kind of like that, honestly. I think that might be a better move. I just want to point out that Honor the Dead is also very good. So the reason Honor the Dead is good, you only want to use it when you're under 75% health. And the reason for that is because it's going to refund over 50% of the cost if you use it. And you don't really need to just top yourself off if you're above 75% health. So just keep that in mind. And it's kind of your burst, like, oh shit, heal is Honor the Dead. You could use Vigor instead. I would use the Selfish Morph. It heals quite a bit, only takes 4 seconds for all the healing to go through, and it heals for a huge amount, so that also works really well. And you could use it and keep it up quite often to just kind of keep yourself topped off in that situation. I would use one or the other, though, in this spot. Next up, we already talked about our Pierce Armor, so this is our melee taunt. It provides major and minor breach. This increases with major breach, it increases the damage the enemy takes by 9%, and then minor provides another 4.5%. Okay, so this is huge, and you absolutely want to have Pierce Armor on your target at all times. Even if you range taunted something, once it gets close enough, or you get close enough to it, you want to go ahead and Pierce Armor it to provide that debuff. And then after that, we have Radiant Ward. Now, with Radiant Ward, one of the reasons we like to use this is because of the passive called Spear Wall. Whenever you activate an Adric's Spear ability, you gain minor protection for 6 seconds, reducing your damage taken by 5%. So, our class shield is what we are going to use often, very, very often, pretty much all the time, as much as you would on a DK, maybe even a little bit more. And the reason for that is preventing damage is better than healing damage. And the minor protection this gives us is really helpful. So using your Radiant Ward every 6 seconds is a great idea. It's fine if it's every 7 or 8, but you want to use it quite often. You might use it even more frequent than that, just to prevent damage, okay? And that way you don't have to heal, and instead you can prevent it to begin with. So Radiant Ward, great ability. You're going to be using this all the time, okay? So just keep that in mind. Radiant Ward you'll be using quite a bit. If you don't like it on the 4 spot, because you're like, you know what, 1 is really easy for me to hit, so if I'm going to be hitting this all the time, I'm going to put it on 1, and maybe that's where you put your shields from now on. So again, just kind of keep that in mind with how you structure things to help yourself out. And that's it for the front bar. Just those 3 skills. Those are going to be the 3 main that don't leave your bar. Your 1 and your 5 spot are flex spots. Now let's go ahead and look at the back bar and talk about some other ones that aren't really going to leave your bar. So first up is Wall of Elements. So again, I already mentioned you want to keep this down because typically you use an infused crusher enchant to reduce enemies' resistances. However, that enchant only applies to 1 target. So it's really mainly useful on boss fights. You always want to keep your Wall of Elements down. If you have an infused crusher enchant and your Wall of Elements is always down, it'll pretty much always be on the enemy, so you're good to go there. Now, if you're in trash, there's no real reason to use Wall of Elements, which is kind of weird. I mean, yeah, it does a little bit of damage, maybe it slows them, but it's not super useful. So in that situation, what a lot of people do, and this is mainly in 4-mans, but because if you're in a larger group, you're going to have a Necromancer probably, and their Boneyard provides AoE Minor Breach. But one of the things you can do is go to the Assault skill line, and you can use Caltrops, okay? And what reason you want to use this because it applies Major Breach in a very large area, and then it also slows enemies down. So this can be very convenient, especially in 4-mans, where you kind of throw this down, and it slows people down enough that you don't even have to taunt them. Your DPS can kind of AoE them all down and kill them pretty quickly, and it buys you time if you do need to grab taunt on them while they're slowed so they can't get to your DPS in the back of the group. And what you can do is you can just swap that out for your Wall of Elements. That's one option you can do, and then you don't really have to worry about saving bar space and et cetera, et cetera. Now, so I said that, you pretty much never move it out, but if it's either Wall of Elements or probably Caltrops is what you'd put there. Now, for a number 2 ability, this is another one that I'm saying like almost never changes out, but Living Dark. So this provides 2200 heal every time you take direct damage up to twice a second. So that's pretty cool, every half second. Now, not all types of damage are direct damage. There's plenty of dots and other things, but this can be a pretty legit heal, and it's very passive. So you use it, it lasts for 10 seconds, and can provide you up to 4,400 healing per second, which is huge. So it's going to work great in trash or any time where you're taking a lot of small hits. That's where it's primarily going to shine. However, another reason to keep this is if you look down in your passives, and I recommend this for everybody, always read and know what your passives do, okay? Casting a Dawn's Wrath ability while in combat generates 3 ultimate, and this can happen every 6 seconds. That's another reason that you want to use it. Now, Living Dark lasts for over 6 seconds, so you could recast it early to just help yourself with a little ulti regen if you've got the spare magic, but just having it on your bar and keeping it cast is a good idea. Now, one thing that I recommend you could swap out is Power of the Light. Power of the Light is extremely cheap, so this is something, and it only lasts for 6 seconds, so it is something that kind of has its own internal timer, and it applies Minor Breach to an enemy. Now, this is mainly, as we already talked about, Pierce Armor applies Minor Breach, but if you wanted to either double staff tank, or if you wanted to range tank something, you might want to swap out Power of the Light, and this is where you could put it. And those are kind of niche situations, but this is where you could put it to swap it out. If you're double staff tanking, probably you're still going to want Living Dark on your bar. So again, you'd probably just move it somewhere else, but just keep that in mind. If you're range tanking, this is probably where I'd swap out, put Power of the Light on here, and you'll be good to go. Next up is our range taunt. Now, I've chosen the Stamina Morph because I found that I have plenty of stamina on this character, mostly due to the next skill we'll talk about. But the idea is that you have plenty of stamina, so I chose Inner Beast. It's also a lot cheaper. It's actually like 2,500 magicka to cast Inner Rage. But again, whatever works for you, you kind of have some flexibility with a Templar as far as like which skills you want to stack. If you want to use Mag or Stam for some of them, maybe you choose a different option than I did. But then you know, with one skill, and then therefore you choose a different option than I did with the other skill, because one costs Mag and one costs Stam, and you want to just kind of swap them out. So that's just an option. Keep that in mind. And then lastly, Restoring Focus. So this ability used to be complete garbage, and you basically just had to stand still for it to have any lasting or useful effect. That has finally changed. It's actually, again, it's been a patch at least. But what it does now is it provides, when you use it, you hit the ability, it provides Major Resolve for 20 seconds, and gives you what you always want, major resolve in all your tanks, and then it also gives you stam recovery. Every second, it gives you 242 stam recovery for 20 seconds. That's huge. For those who don't know, your recovery typically lasts or usually is given on a per 2-second basis. So if you have to take whatever, if this gives you 80 magic recovery, you have to divide that 2, and okay, it's 40 every second equivalent. So this gives you 240 stamina every second, which is huge, and the cost is basically negligible. Okay, now I do have my main tank set up on this character, so you can see what the numbers will look like when you're in content or pretty close to it. So I do have some reduced costs. Normally the skill costs a little bit more than this, but you get the idea. It's still almost free. Now those two abilities used to get any benefit from the skill, you used to have to be standing inside of the ruin. That is no longer the case. Those two parts of the ability work whether you're inside the ruin or not, just by casting Restoring Focus. Now, if you're standing inside of the ruin, it will heal you 2.4k health every second while you're standing inside of the ruin. And so what happens with this Restoring Focus is you'll be in mobile fights where you have to move a lot. You'll be recasting this quite often. It's basically free. It costs so little. So it's not really a big deal to have to move from point A to point B. And with the stamina recovery, again, it kind of pays for itself. So it's fine if you have to move and you're only standing someplace for 8 seconds, as long as you have the global cooldown, the time to cast an ability, you don't have something else that's more important, you can recast this skill to give yourself significant healing. The other thing is the radius is 3 meters, so it does give you 6 meters across to kind of move around in within that circle, and that's not too bad. So I'm really happy with where this skill is at. It still has a class identity. It still wants you to stand inside the ruin, but it's not like, oh man, if you're not standing inside your ruin, the class sucks. And that's kind of the situation that we used to be in. So they've done a great job with this skill. It's in a good spot. I hope they don't mess it up. Don't change it. It's great. Sauce, if you're listening, leave this skill, okay? It's good. It's in a good spot. And that's it for the class abilities that aren't really going to leave our bar. Okay, now let's go ahead and talk about those flex spots here, and we'll move back to the front bar. So first up, Heroic Slash. Heroic Slash, the main reason you use this is, well, there's two. One is it provides minor maim, reducing the damage done by the enemy you hit by 5% for 12 seconds. That's really nice. Reducing your damage taken is always a good idea, especially on hard-hitting bosses. Now, the thing is, minor maim is also provided by a couple of other places. The most notable, I would say, is a Nightblade Shade. Nightblade Shade's either morph provides this minor maim just by hitting the target. So if you have a Nightblade in the group, chances are they're using Shade, and chances are minor maim will already be applied to the boss if it's a boss. Now, the second part of this is always useful, and that is minor heroism. So it provides you with minor heroism, which gives you more ulti regen. More ulti regen means more Warhorns with Nazare to increase buff up times and debuff up times. So that's always good. So you can always kind of use this skill. However, you can definitely swap it out with something else. I tend to put a chain here on trash because Heroic Slash only affects one target, even though it does, you have to use it one for each target, even though it does give you minor heroism for however many seconds to get gen ult. I just find it something I can easily do away with in trash and instead put a chain or something else on your bar. But again, anything it's a flex spot. So anything you want to put here, you can put there. Now, another useful skill is Explosive Charge. So it used to be that Dragon Knight's Deep Breath was the only AoE interrupt in the game. Now, Explosive Charge will interrupt enemies, and in a pretty large area. So 6 meter radius, so 12 meters across. This could be really useful for places like Veteran Halls of Fabrication with like the first boss, if you needed to interrupt the spheres when they're channeling. Veteran Maw of Lorcage on the second boss, the Twins, if you need to interrupt some of the ads. There's plenty of places where you need an AoE interrupter that could be useful. Veteran Kind's Aegis on the trash pools when you're trying to interrupt the infusers. This is not only a charge, it's a charge and an interrupt, so it could be very good in VKA. So anyways, just a really useful skill, one you should know about. Definitely have leveled up, and you have to morph it to get the interrupt. So keep that in mind. Really good skill, and I like where it's at. Anything else you want to ever put here, Race Against Time or something else, totally valid to put in this spot. It just doesn't matter. It's up to you. And then for our 5 skills. So I have here Repentance, and I would tend to leave Repentance here quite often. You can actually use either morph of this skill, and both are good in different situations. So I'm talking about repentance. That's kind of the selfish morph. So what it does is it provides you with minor fortitude, minor endurance, and minor intellect, which all increase your health, stamina, and magic recovery respectively by 15%. Now, that is great. It only works while you're actually on the bar. So that's why we put it on our front bar, because that's where we're most of the time. So if you put this on your back bar and you're on your front bar, it's not going to provide any benefit for you, at least not with these particular buffs that I'm talking about. Now, why that's not awesome and why this just doesn't ever leave your bar is because you can get those buffs from a lot of other places. So just realize that sorcerers providing minor intellect, I believe. There's several places you can get, and you will tend to have these already in your group depending. But it's not a bad idea to make sure you always have them up. Maybe you don't have an optimized group. You could always use, more resources. So that's why, I like this skill. The other reason is that if you're in any fight where there's ads and there's dead bodies around you, you can use this ability actively. It doesn't cost you anything. It will heal you for a bit, and it'll give you a ton of stam back for each corpse consumed. So if you're in trash, or you're in like Veteran Rockgrove on the first boss Oaks, and you're having to chain in ads constantly and running out of stamina, well, there's also going to be a bunch of dead frogs there. And so you can hit this ability to gain a ton of stam, and so you can kind of infinitely chain in frogs, and you don't have to worry about running out of stam, which you do on several other classes. So that's really useful. And again, there's plenty more situations. I'm just trying to give you some for instances so that you kind of have an idea of when you might want to use this skill. And I think it's really good for that. Now, if we look at Radiant Aura, Now, the benefit of this is it provides all that minor fortitude, minor endurance, minor intellect to everybody in your party in a huge radius. And it doesn't cost anything. It lasts for 20 seconds, gives major buffs, and also applies minor magic steel to enemies around you. So that increases your allies. So it's a huge buff if you use Radiant Aura. Again, the only reason you might not use this is you might get those buffs from some other source, in which case you don't need this. And if you're wondering what those are, you can just type into Google minor intellect, minor endurance, and there'll be several websites that come up. They tend to be like Wohlers, I believe is his name, and Outcast. Their websites with ESO Hub and stuff like that. But several websites will come up, and you can see what benefits, what class skills, what armor sets provide these buffs, and so you can go find this information for yourself. So if you're like, oh, I can't remember, who gives minor intellect, and you can type it in and you can find it for yourself and determine if you want to use this. I would tend to use repentance in most situations personally. Other skills you can use here, really anything. If you wanted to go survival focus, you could do something like Flare. Any other useful skill you might need situationally, you could put it in your bar here. It's really anything you want to use. Now, onto our back bar. Again, the main spot we have here is our 5 spot. You could also use 2, which I have the Living Dark as a flex spot, but I like it so much I would tend to leave it there unless you absolutely have to move it. So on your 5 spot, again, same situation. You can use whatever you want. Overflowing Altar is always great to have at least one of in all groups. You could also, and I put it on the side here, but Extended Ritual would be a really good one. It'll cleanse you. It'll allow your allies to use a synergy to cleanse themselves, and that can be very helpful in certain fights, help out your healers, but it also provides a heal over time, both for yourself and, again, for the rest of your group. And if you look down into the passives, you'll find that there are several passives here that can be very useful. As I mentioned before, I think I mentioned, actually, Sacred Ground. So whenever you're standing in your own cleansing ritual, Ruin Focus, or Rite of Passage area of effects, and for 4 seconds after leaving them, you gain minor mending, increasing your healing done. So that'll increase your self-healing, which is nice. And it will also increase the amount of damage you can block by 10% for the duration. So that's really cool. So that is another reason, I think I mentioned this under Restoring Focus, but another reason why you want to use Restoring Focus is because not only will it heal you, it'll also increase the amount you can block when you're standing in it. And instead, if you went with like Extended Ritual, it would do the same thing in a much larger area for you, so you don't have to worry about making sure you're in the right area. And having another heal over time will pretty much keep you topped off 100% of the time, on your Templar, and you won't really need much heals from anybody else in the group, which is really nice to have. And it's about time, right? It's a Templar. They're the best healing class in the game. Why for the longest time were their heals not any good on a tank? It's crazy. But anyways, I won't get caught up in that. Now that's pretty much it for this for the skills here. Now I will say, if you are trying to just be very survivable, okay, I mentioned I did videos on other things. I have done a video on how to make any tanking class very survivable, or as survivable as I have ever needed to have. And I haven't done VRG hard mode or DSR. I've done all the other hard modes, and again, you know, most situations, for 99.9% of people, it'll be as unkillable God mode infinite sustain as you ever need. So anyways, I've done that in a separate video. I'll pop it up here. If you're just trying to figure out, hey, I'm dying, that should help you. Besides doing the basics of making sure you're blocking heavy attacks, you're healing yourself, you're keeping your buffs up so you don't take too much damage. Besides that kind of stuff. But like how to actually set up your bar and what gear to wear, all that's in that video. Go check it out. It's my unkillable God mode infinite sustain super chungus build, I think is what I called it on the thumbnail, because I'm kind of poking a little bit of good fun at some of those builds that promises things they don't really deliver. So anyways. All right, now after skills, let's go ahead and move on. And you know, this is a good time to mention, if you ever have questions about anything, either trials or a particular build or something, or a skill or question, or what to do in a certain situation, I live stream typically 3 to 4 times a week. And come drop into those. If you hit the bell icon, it should notify you whenever I'm going live, and I'll try to put that up. I've had some internet problems, so I don't have anything scheduled right at this moment, but I will in the very near future, just because I got to wait for my internet service provider to come fix my internet before I can really stream again. But come by, ask questions, say hello. I'm always happy to help, and that can often be a good time if you have a question about a trial or whatever, or drop by the Discord. All right, so moving on, let's go ahead and talk through some really quick things. So for Mundus, generally speaking, we're going to use the Atronach Mundus. There are other options. Again, I've done other videos on that, so you can go check them out. But the Atro Mundus provides you with magic regen on most of your tank classes. That's what you're going to want. Next up is gear. Right now, the current meta is to have Yolnahkrin and Turning Tide and Nazare on the main tank. There's a set coming out. I think you could swap out Turning Tide, and I'm going to have some options on that, but I'll cover that in another video. Right now, Yolnahkrin, Turning Tide, Nazare is the main tank setup. For the off tank, you probably want Pearls, the Pearlescent Ward from the new trial Dreadcell Reef, and then Powerful Assault, and then either Encratis or the new set where you can heavy attack. It's called Archdruid something. Deveris or Deverit, I don't know, something like that. And that lets you heavy attack to provide the same buff you would get from a Colossus. Okay, or debuff rather, to an opponent. And it does an AoE effect. So that's going to be something that I think could be interested and could replace Encratis, just because there's not as much fire damage as there used to be. Sorry, I always start to go into something more depth, and I'm like, I need to keep this short. So I'm trying to do my best. Now, moving on to attribute points here. So typically, the simplest and easiest thing to do, and a totally valid thing, is just to put all your points in health. Okay. However, I will say you generally only want like a little over 40k health on a tank, and about 45-ish on certain hard modes where they're pretty hard hitting. So 40 to 45k-ish. If you have anything more than that, you don't need that. And so you might take some points out of health. That's an easy way to do it. Now realize what gear you're wearing, what enchantments you have. Typically, heavy armor comes with all health enchants. Change those. You don't necessarily need to do tri-stat enchants, but you could do stamina on some, magical on others, and kind of balance it out. And then you could, if that doesn't work or you've already done that, you could move some points out of health and put it wherever you want, so that you get to, fully buffed, you get to that 40 to 45k range. Again, only needing like 45k if you're doing hard modes. Anything more is generally just wasted. It's not really useful. And in certain situations where there's healing debuffs, like Baneful and Cloud Rest and stuff like that, having too much health is actually a detriment to you and your group. So keep that in mind. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but going through all the stats, I've been like, oh, we have X amount of health, X amount of Magicka, X amount of whatever. That's generally just not useful. You never build for those things. They're always secondary choices. You're going to choose what armor you wear based on what best buffs the group. You're going to choose what skills you use based on what buffs the group, what keeps you alive, et cetera, et cetera. And the last thing you're going to worry about is what all these stats are in general. Okay. So if your resistances, you can double check them when you're fully buffed to kind of see what they are. The soft resistance cap is 33k, meaning that you can go over, you just don't really get any benefit from going over unless your resistances are debuffed for some reason. So we can see here, fully buffed, we're sitting at about 28,000 resistances. Again, if you're wanting to know how to max it out and how to keep yourself alive, check out my Unkillable God Mode Super Chungus build that I did recently, and it'll explain how to get there. Basically, you throw on Master Sword and Board, and then you can do a few other things. But yeah, anyways, you can find that there. Next up is CP. So CP, what I recommend generally speaking is always have Ironclad on your bar, reduces your damage taken from direct damage attacks. Duelist Rebuff, this reduces your damage taken by single target attacks by 3%. Going to be happening all the time too as a main tank, so that's really good. And then Enduring Resolve, this reduces your damage taken by 3% per stage, so 6%. A lot of really hard-hitting damage that you take as a tank is a damage over time. So think Veteran Rockgrove, but there's a lot of other places too where you like Basai and stuff like that, where you'll take damage over time. So I actually recommend Duelist Rebuff, Enduring Resolve, and Ironclad almost always being on your bar. Now after that, a couple of options. Unassailable reduces your damage taken from area of effect attacks by, again, you can get up to 6%. Now the thing with this ability is that it's typically area of effect attacks are not designed to kill the tank. They're designed to either be heal checks or to kill the DPS, because they're not going to, if it did enough damage to kill the tank, it would one-shot everybody else. So it's usually scaled to deal damage to the DPS and be scary for them, but not kill them. And so for you, that's typically very little damage. And so that's why oftentimes you don't need Unassailable. There are exceptions to that rule where there's AoEs that will scale or will hurt you really bad. And so Unassailable can be a very useful skill to have. However, you could also go with like Arcane Supremacy to increase your max magicka if you wanted to do something like that. Or what I think might be one of the most interesting choices is Foresight. And Foresight is all the way at the tip of the spear. It's a healing ability, I think is kind of where it's primarily meant to be. But if you drink a potion, the cost of your magic and stamina healing abilities used within the next 6 seconds are reduced by 75%. So what this means is if you're in a situation where you take a lot of damage, and that's usually when you would be saving your potions for that, or if you know you're about to be taking a lot of damage, you can drink a potion, and then basically your heals they're not free, but they're so cheap, right? You could use 4 times for it. So you can just spam your heals for 6 seconds and help keep yourself alive. So if you're cursed on Basai, this is going to be a huge help for you. But any other situation where you might have an oh shit moment where you drink a potion, you're going to be able to spam your heals and it's going to cost next to nothing. So I think this Foresight could be a really good contender and almost might be one that I would just keep slotted a lot of times because it is just so good. So just something to think about there. Now on to the red CP. Now with the red CP, there's like 80 options, okay? And I've got them listed there, and I will do a video on CP. I haven't done one yet that really walks through and talks about this. So I'm just going to give a brief idea. And I'm going to say here, use what you want and what works well for you. And I'm going to give recommendations, but feel free, be flexible here. Use what is good for you and what's good for you on a given fight. So Expert Evasion. This gives you a free dodge roll every 30 seconds. This is a huge help, and I highly recommend you slot the CP. I almost never take this off my bar just because it's so good. And there's few situations where it's not good, I don't feel like swapping it out, so I leave it on there, okay? So if you're doing some really sweaty hard modes, yeah, you might want to swap it out if you're not using it. But having a free dodge roll, if you accidentally run out of stamina and you absolutely need to dodge a heavy attack because you can't block it or because something else, having this can save your life. So yeah, Expert Evasion, can't recommend it enough. Celerity increases your movement speed by 10% if you have it maxed out. per stage, it's just a huge help. It's often, surprisingly often, it is useful to be able to move fast as a tank, and so celerity works great for that. You can also use one piece of swift jewelry, and that can be very helpful as well, but celerity is nice because you can just slot it and you're good to go. Next is rejuvenation. So this increases your mag, stamina, and health recovery by 90 points. Recovery and having more resources is just always good on a tank, and so rejuvenation is kind of nice. It always works. If you have it slotted, you're not blocking, you're going to get all those regen. So it's just really nice to have. So that's why it's kind of like a go-to. There's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing amazing about it, but there's nothing wrong with it, and it's always going to help you. So it's nice. And then last up is fortified. So fortified increases your resistances, and that just reduces all damage you take. So again, it's just kind of a no-brainer. You don't have to do anything. It's very much like rejuvenation, where it's not necessarily anything to write home about, but it's always going to give you a benefit, and it is, while it's not huge, or it is significant enough to help you out. So it's something to keep in mind. So that's why I like fortified. Now, again, I have a whole list of all the different passives and CP passives that you could put on and their benefits and everything like that. Now, other ones that could be very useful, you might go with something like Boundless Vitality to increase your max health. Maybe you're doing hard modes, you're getting hit really hard. Maybe you've spec'd some other stuff differently and you need more max health. So Boundless Vitality works well. Bracing Anchor will increase the amount of damage you can block. Now, the problem is it slows you down significantly even after you've let go of block. So it's better on fights that are less mobile, or where there's like a mobile portion and then you're just standing there. And then there's a mobile portion and then you're just standing there. Places I can think of possibly could be like Maw of Lorcaj, right? When you move from one pad to the other, but after that you're just standing there and you want high damage mitigation if you're on like hard mode or something. So you just kind of have to decide when and where to use that. Tank mitigation is up very high from what it has been historically. So I find myself not needing Bracing Anchor a lot, and I find having the mobility to be a lot more convenient. So that's why I don't have it as like, hey, always put this on your bar, because I often don't have it on my bar because I just don't feel like I need it anymore, and I want that speed. Other things that are useful, Slippery is really nice in the last boss of Dreadcell Reef. It lets you automatically break free if you're stunned. Strategic Reserve and Refreshing Stride both give you huge benefits. One gives you health recovery for having ultimate, just having ultimate sitting kind of in your character, not used. So it gives you a lot of health recovery. And then the other one, while sprinting, you get health and mag recovery. Now, both of those CPs are really useful on Cloud Rest, and they're good enough and significant enough that, and Cloud Rest can be hard enough that I recommend putting them on. You don't really use them in really any other situation I can think of, but they're good enough that I thought they should be mentioned here, even though it's mostly just Cloud Rest that they're useful in. There might be one other place for one of those other ones, but you get the idea. And then last, Shield Master and Ward Master. So this reduces the cost of your shields, and then I believe the other one increases the effectiveness of them, both by 10% each. Potentially they could be good. Are you going to notice that difference in cost, the 10% cost reduction? Maybe. It's not bad. And a Templar is one where you're going to be using your shield all the time. So I could see how both these skills, or both these CP rather, could be useful on a Templar. I have tried them out. I haven't tried them out enough that I can say definitively, oh, these are great, these are go-to, or it's not really going to matter. But I think just from looking at it, we can say that, like, yeah, this is probably going to be useful and significant, but it's up to you if you want to use it. And as I try it out more, I will update it when I do the CP video and maybe let you guys know what I thought of it. All right, for gear. So basically, if you want to keep it simple and cheap, you can just go with sturdy on all of your body pieces, everything. If you've got a little bit more money, you've been playing for a while, it can be a little bit more advantageous to have infused pieces on the large pieces. Large ones are your chest, your legs, and then your head. They will give you the most benefit from infused, and then you use a tri-stat enchant. If you're really rich and you want to do tri-stats on everything, you can do that. I don't think it really gives you that much of a benefit unless you're really doing extremely hard content, so it's not really necessary. You can just kind of alternate between magicka and stamina enchants on everything, and typically you want to keep your stamina higher. I'm questioning that now, if that is still the case with every class and every situation, because you get more of your highest resource back whenever you're using certain synergies. And so, I don't know if that's actually necessary anymore, but here or there, you can kind of play with it yourself and decide what you want to do. And then for jewelry, I would recommend 3 pieces of infused jewelry, and then you can choose your enchants. I recommend recommend 2 reduced prismatic cost. Those are very good. You could also do either 1 or several of mag recovery that are, again, infused, or if you want to play around with some of the CP that I mentioned with the potion drinking, you could also do some reduced cooldown for your potions. Those are more of a niche thing. I think it's better on a Nightblade, which generates ultimate by drinking potions, but just something to keep in mind. And then after that, on your shield, same deal, sturdy, and then just basic enchant. It's not a big deal. For your weapon, I recommend infused on both bars. On your back bar, you're going to have infused crusher enchant, and then your front bar, you can kind of do whatever you want. I happen to have like a flame glyph. I think this is back from a little bit old meta for a DK, but you can do any enchant that sounds good. There's one that gives you a shield. There's some that will reduce opponents' resistances. There's several things you can do. It really doesn't matter. It's just kind of whatever you want to do on the front bar, and that's pretty much it for gear. All right, so for rotation, what you're going to want to do is go ahead and open up with Restoring Focus. That'll go ahead and give you the Major Resolve and give you a little bit of stamina regen. And then you're going to go with Living Dark, pop that. And then at that point, you can probably charge in. You could hit Radiant Ward right before you pull, and that'll just keep you from taking damage while you're moving and getting things in position where you might not want to be holding block because you're trying to move something into position where you want to stack it. After that, obviously, you're going to open with Pierce Armor. Then if you're on a boss fight, you might go with something like Wall. If you're on trash fights, you actually might open with something like Caltrops before, just to get a little soft aggro. No skill actually does like soft aggro, but if you hit a mob first, sometimes it will stick to you. Then if you want to do low slash, etc., etc. But the main thing you want to make sure that you're doing the entire time is keeping your Restoring Focus up 100%, Living Dark as close to 100% as you can. If you're using something like Extended Ritual, has a really long duration, so you could drop that as well. Make sure you got the healing, all your hots down, and then you're going to use Radiant Ward every 6 seconds. Typically, you don't have to do quite every 6 seconds, especially if you're running low on mag, but it works really well, especially if you're taking a lot of damage. And then either your heal whenever you need it, again, keep low slash up for that minor heroism, and just whatever else you need at that point. And with that, I think that covers everything, guys. That is the Templar build video. So hopefully I didn't go too long. I'm sure I did. If you stuck around this long, I really appreciate you guys watching. I try to make good, in-depth, interesting, but also educational content so that, like, hey, you can watch this video, you can learn about these skills, and then when things change, you can kind of make decisions for yourself. Maybe you still want to come check out my videos, double check if anything's changed, if you've ever missed anything, but hopefully you'll have kind of the knowledge that you can make changes for yourself, and that then you can go on and teach other people, because that's the goal. We want to get more people into endgame, and that's why I do most of what I do. If you ever just want to say hi, you want to come meet, again, I stream usually 3 or 4 times a week, almost always on YouTube, so come check it out there. And you're always welcome to come join the That Was in the Boss Discord server. If you are in a guild and you're on PC, if you're on PC, NA or EU, I'm still leveling up my EU character, and you're looking for a raid lead, or you could use one. I am for sale. Not really for sale, but I am happy to come run some trials and explain mechanics and stuff like that in a different Discord. If you have a group and you want to make a spot for me, I can come on any role. So that's just something I want to put out there. And drop by the That Was in the Boss Discord server and then send me a DM. Say, hey, we got a group together, but we don't know how to run something. We'd love to have you come run. I love running trials and I love teaching them, and I'd love to do that. So if you have a community or group that's on PC, right now that's all I have. I don't have an Xbox or anything else. So anyways, but hit me up. And that's it for this video, guys. Thanks again for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one. So did the meteor go off? How did that